Hey everyone, welcome to the second part where we're walking through how to overhaul your focus for an outsized impact. Now, this is part two. In part one, we really looked at knowing your progress must start with knowing where you're at. So we really looked at, okay, how can we do an audit? How can we really understand where things are at today so that we can make an impact and a change for what we want to do and how we want to change things for the future. Driving marketing growth can be mysterious. I don't know it all, but I'm exploring to connect the data, inform decisions, and get results. Grow your marketing strategy and how you lead. Get data driven with Scott. So today we're going to look at 3 keys to becoming the type of team that you want to become. So number 1 is creating routines. Number 2, I know it does sound boring, but bear with me, it is worthwhile. Number 2 is finding where your KPIs can fit into that routine. And then number 3 is creating action from what you see. So on number 1, creating a routine for review. So it's great to do an audit and it's awesome to know, okay, this is what's happening today and this is where we're at. But once that's done, how are you now going to encourage the incremental change? Now, I've found that this is best done in creating routines. There's actually a term called habit stacking, which is coined at least by James Clear. Check out Atomic Habits. I referenced another point from his book in the previous episode, but this one's really about finding those routines that you can attach onto to make the change easier to introduce. So at work within a team, especially in a digital team, you're going to have a plethora of metrics at hand. But your routine should focus on your most important KPIs or targets. That is, if you're serious about meeting them. Within my teams that I work in, I like to do fortnightly reports and quarterly reviews typically. It changes and ebbs and flows with depending what business you're working in. But within a review, I love to look at the data and analyze this, if I can say that correctly, analyze this to understand what's going on. So the data is always going to tell your story, even if that story is that your data's a mess. And there is, something to take away from when your data is a mess, do something about it. But stepping on to number 2 first is finding where your KPIs fit into your routine. So in the previous episode, we walked through KPIs and how KPIs can fit into 3 distinct layers. One is direct influence, second is shared influence, and the third is indirect influence. Now, goals within a direct influence bucket, they're more than likely going to require more frequent routine review versus those in the shared influence bucket or KPIs there could have a longer cycle to really mature and to see what the results are. Let's take, for example, we've got leads in the direct influence bucket and opportunities in the shared influence bucket. Now, for a lead, my team could typically have a pretty direct influence over what happens there. So we could change things on landing pages. We could drive up more junk leads. Not that I'm encouraging doing that. We could, purposefully drive more leads that are really a good fit for purpose. And it might actually reduce the quantity, but we might drive more people who are actually actively putting their hands up saying, hey, I want to speak to sales, just by tweaking our call to actions, making them very clear that, hey, request a demo, request a quote, things like that, where the expectation of the person submitting that form really knows what they're getting into and they're ready to speak with someone. So that's a good example of where we can adjust things on pages. We can adjust our traffic and our ad copy to really reflect that continuation of what we are expecting to deliver for someone, and then that exchange of information so that they're really set up for success. versus we take the look down the shared influence bucket, which we could say an opportunity target goal is in that bucket. These are going to take a lot longer to mature. We've got to have conversations with people. We need to set up meetings. We need to find out if their pain points really are aligned with our solution that we're selling. We need to make sure they have a budget. There's many stages to make sure that we actually get it to a qualified opportunity. So you can see how that takes time versus someone simply completing a form really is a fairly quick exchange and transaction. So this really influences how frequently we are going to be looking at these different KPIs. So for a lead, we can look at that daily. In most businesses, for opportunities, if it's a B2B type of cycle, you're going to want to look at those opportunities probably more on a monthly cycle. And when we look further down the funnel in the indirect influence bucket, we've got close revenue and what's actually driving close win deals. Those typically, again, maybe monthly, depending again on the business. If you've got an e-commerce flow and it's all just happening all the time, you could also be looking at that daily. But really, if we're going to look at teams where you've got sales teams that have targets and they're driving up for, a month end close, then really monthly is probably the right cycle. All right, let's say that we're reviewing our KPIs regularly now, and we're learning that some channels are underperforming and some are doing great. Now, what are you going to do about it? Which brings us to point number 3. So creating action based on what you see. So I personally could spend hours looking at the data, analyzing to get key insights. I sometimes get lost in it, to be honest, and have to pull myself back out. But sometimes this is good and necessary to get to root cause of a problem that rears its head in the metrics. But I would warn that if you don't share your findings or formulate a plan and take some action based on what you see, then you're wasting your time with the analysis. So how do you review your results? Number 1, look for anomalies. And number 2, know your business flows. E.g., does your sales team tend to close a lot of deals at the end of a month? Or does it have a steady throughput throughout? Did your team launch a new campaign this week? And can I see the effects of that showing up in the data? Did your team make a change in how your forms work? That could drastically affect your lead volume. What are you expecting to see from the changes that your team is working on and doing, and see if you can find data to really support the things that are happening in your business. So also, just a word of caution, beware of confirmation bias. Just because you want to see data in a certain area doesn't mean you dig and dissect until you find that result and that answer. And if you really want to understand the true effects of your work, then you've got to run randomized split testing. I'm going to dive a lot more into how to run split tests in future episodes and how you can do that on even smaller traffic sizes to still get statistically significant results. But for now, I'd just say run your results by someone else. Get a second opinion, gut check things, and make sure you're not really just jumping to conclusions that don't really exist in the data. So here's the actions I'd love for you to have a think about of what we've talked about. So number 1, is there a mismatch between your current team identity and your goal team identity? And have a think about what actions you could start to introduce that can really nudge you towards being that type of team. So as we talked about in the previous episode, casting more votes to be the ideal type of team that you want to become. Number 2, do you currently have a routine review of your results? If not, think about what that cadence should be for starting. Don't overshoot. Don't do something too regularly that's too burdensome. You want to look for something that is really easy to repeat. If it's a big load to do this work, maybe it needs to be a little less regularly, or figure out a way to make it easier to produce. And then number 3, have you defined your goal targets? Don't wait for a boss or manager to define these for you, and don't even wait for them to ask for you to do a regular report, take this action on yourself and, write down what you want to measure as your KPIs, share it with your team or your manager, get the feedback, and align it with the larger business goals. Lastly, if you measure it, learn from it. Shifting the needle on your results is totally achievable. I want you to know that. And when you do, don't forget to celebrate the wins. All right, thanks everyone.